It is a trade deadline eve edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and you know that we had to get the dynamic duo to ride once again, at least once before the trade deadline. Damichael Cole and I are going to be talking the best injury report ever and my cynical view of how convenient it is that almost everybody's healthy just in time for the trade deadline. Plus, we're going to do a trade rumor roundup, a new name to discuss in the trade rumor mill. And of course, we'll preview the last game before the deadline, Memphis, Toronto. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole. It's been too long since we've been able to say that, a few individual episodes in a row. Life happens, though, and by life, I mean your co-host being washed and old, newly 38-year-old co-host here, not able to stay up as late as I once was. But we're here together today, and we're so glad that you're with us as well here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you can get $20 off your first purchase. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get podcasts, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. And make sure that you're checking out our free daily newsletter as well, lockedondaily.com. Great NBA content, great fantasy basketball advice, but words from me on the Memphis Grizzlies each and every day. Check it out. Go to lockedondaily.com. Subscribe to the Locked On Grizzlies free daily newsletter. Again, that's lockedondaily.com. Damichael, it's good to see you again, partner. A lot has transpired since the last time that we were together.
Yeah, you're a year older now.
I am a year older, a year more washed. That is true. But the exciting thing is that the trade deadline is near. Only one more sleep until the trade deadline has come and gone. Hopefully no more discussion of Jimmy Butler. I kind of just want it to happen at this point if it's going to happen, right?
Yeah,
just the randomness of it still throws me off. But we'll get to trade rumor roundup here in a little bit. I want to lead off with when it came across my X feed, my social media feed, Damichael, it blew my mind because I'm sure you, as Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, you probably had an inkling. You probably had a hunch that this was going to be an interesting injury report for Memphis in a good way. I do not have the sources or the connection to the team that you do. And when I saw it, I almost called you. Like we usually text. I almost called you. Like, just like sing you a sweet, sweet song. How happy I was to see this. Only Cam Spencer and Desmond Bane, excuse me. Yep, only Desmond Bane and Cam Spencer out. I'm so shocked. I'm frozen by this reality. Lots of questionables. Lots of questionables. So there's still wiggle room for them to get out of it. But it's possible that the Grizzlies have more active players than they have had in quite some time going into Toronto tonight against the Raptors. Now we'll preview the game later on. Forgive me, partner. I've been covering this team for a long time, and I am very cynical. How convenient it is that on the eve of the NBA trade deadline, with all of these rumors, again, we'll cover some of them later on in the show, surrounding Memphis, how convenient that Marcus Smart and Vince Williams Jr. all of a sudden questionable. They could play. They could not play. What a funny, oh no, his finger flared up. That poor Marcus Smart guy, the injury. It's crazy. He's going to have to sit this one out. Maybe he'll play in the next game, or maybe he'll play for a completely different team because he's going to get traded by the Memphis Grizzlies. Am I being too cynical? Should I just take a deep breath and enjoy the fact that Memphis is starting to actually get healthy? Or am I right to be a little bit cynical? We'll see if these guys actually play.
I'll go a step further for you, and one's going to give you a good reaction, and one's not going to be so good. But John Conchar is also questionable.
Ooh.
But Brandon Clark is also questionable in this game.
I feel there's a high likelihood that all those guys get downgraded to out before Toronto.
Very possible, but I think some of it is coincidence and some of it is the situation. But at the end of the day, if you look at the Vince Williams situation and Marcus Smart situation, this pretty much checks out with what the Grizzlies have kind of pressed as their timelines. I know with Vince Williams, they had the goal of him being back towards late January. That was the goal. And then they realized he's not going to be back by that point. And specifically focusing on him, what we do know is the Grizzlies wanted him back at that stretch. That's why I think, I don't think his appearance right before the trade deadline has anything to do with anything more than the fact that that's when he's going to be able to play. Simply because remember when we were talking about it in early mid-January, we said the Grizzlies want to get a look at Gigi Jackson. They want to get a look at Vince Williams. And those two players, how they're progressing, how they're playing, will impact the aggressiveness from the Grizzlies at the trade deadline. If they weren't looking good, the Grizzlies probably going to be very aggressive and going to find some upgrade. If they did look good, it's like, well, we know what we need to go get some players for. We got these guys already ready to go. So what you have, I think, over the last few days, Joe, is an incomplete. You're a teacher. You know what an incomplete grade is what we have. I don't think it's a bad grade. I don't think it's a good grade. We just saw Gigi Jackson put up 27 points, but guess what? We only get to see him play one more time to kind of confirm or deny if that was just a one-off game or if this is just a sign of what he's going to be for the rest of this season. I mean, we know what he's going to be long-term, but we're talking about the playoff run, the March-April stretch of this season. Vince Williams, same thing. There are some questions there. I mean, me and Joe have agreed on the talent. We like this guy as a player, but we're realists. And the realist in you will say, man, this guy, he played 3 games earlier this season, and he was pretty much shut down early mid-March of last season. So you're talking roughly the last 11 months, 7-8 games played. Like, that's tough. I mean, because 11 months, that's essentially a NBA season. Over the last NBA season, you're saying a guy who's played 7 or 8 games, and now you got to kind of expect him to really factor in and be a difference maker, because that's what I want, to see from Vince Williams. Vince Williams needs to be a difference maker because he showed the potential to be that in the very small sample size. We saw him on the floor with Ja, Dez, and Jaren last season. But, yeah, the injury report is interesting. And the other interesting part of it, Joe, and this is going away from the trades because I know we're going to talk a little bit about that more, is how do you play all these dudes? Now, because we're talking potentially with Desmond Bane out of the fold because he's out, 14 standard roster guys will be active. If that's if all the questionable guys play. So let me clarify that. That's potentially 14 of your standard roster guys active. We know he wants to play at least 13 of them because you take John Conchar out of the equation. Okay, let's say you want to take J Huff out of the equation. There's still 12 guys. How does he handle that, Joe?
It's a great question. I think today, it's not going to matter because I have a sneaky suspicion that all 4 of these guys, Conchar, Clark, Smart, and Williams Jr., are going to be out against the Raptors. We'll talk more about that later on in the program. I think Williams Jr. is the one that's the most likely to play because I think Williams Jr. is the one that is most likely to stick around. I hope that Brandon Clark is in that same family. I don't want to see Brandon Clark dealt depending on the trade, of course. Smart and Conchar, I think that it's a window into what Memphis is thinking going into the deadline because if you look around the NBA at other injury reports, Colin Sexton has a sprained ankle and will be reevaluated in, I believe the exact time is 1 week, Damichael Cole. I wonder why that time frame, this name that keeps getting brought up in trade possibilities, all of a sudden has a tweaked ankle, right? Like, I think that there is something to that. And the injury report, as it gets updated throughout the day today, is going to be really important to point out and look at because if guys play, now, in fairness, Memphis has played guys in the past that have still been a part of trade rumors. So it's not a perfect marriage of logic there. But I do think if you see, especially somebody like Marcus Smart with the finger injury, if they pull Marcus Smart, it's because they don't want him to get any more hurt if somebody is interested. Or it could be the opposite. Maybe a team wants to see that Marcus Smart is actually able to play basketball.
Show us he can play.
Right, and they limit his minutes. Maybe he only logs 14 and see, he's alive and he can play basketball still. He might be your guy.
And to your point.
Yeah, go ahead.
to your point though, if there is some validity to that, I think that the game will be telling in a way, in terms of why didn't this guy play that much? But he usually plays that much, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, that's all I had to add.
No, I think you're exactly right. And so it's not just the injury report itself, it's how the minutes get distributed. And we'll talk more about that, of course, later on in the show in our preview of Grizzlies Raptors. But before we preview the game, we have some trade rumors to round up. A Ball brother may be coming to Memphis.
LaMelo's coming to Memphis.
It'd be cool if it was LaMelo. Don't get me wrong. That I would sign off on, even as much as I hate on the guy. Oh, he'd be the best sixth man in the history of the NBA. Manu Ginobili existed. I'm sorry. So maybe not the best man, his sixth man in history. But anyway, we're going to talk about how Lonzo Ball might be coming to Memphis coming up next here on the program. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at Gametime. I'm a big fan of Gametime. You should be as well, especially if you're looking for tickets to your next big event, a concert, a comedy show, sports game. Finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache, but with Gametime Picks, it has never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you, curating the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. You can grab a super deal for a prime seat. It is amazing value that is truly a steal. And you also get the seat view feature, which is a game changer. Before you even hit pay, you can see exactly what your seat will look like in the venue. It's extremely reassuring. And the best part is that you're covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they will refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are to be guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, Damichael, the trade rumor roundup. To be truthful, I don't really feel like talking about Miami anymore with Jimmy Butler, unless it somehow gets Kevin Durant to Memphis, right? I think that would be kind of fun. That would be kind of interesting to have happen for the Memphis Grizzlies. But what I do want to talk about is this latest trade rumor involving, I always mispronounce his name, Mike Scotto.
Yeah.
One of those two. Scotto, there you go. Mike Scotto. Yeah. Shout out to Mike Scotto, reporting over at Hoops Hype, talking about how the Memphis Grizzlies are reportedly interested in Lonzo Ball. Now, Lonzo is probably one of the best stories in recent NBA history. This guy has had literal knee replacement, essentially, has had so many issues medically, but has bounced back and is having a decent season. I don't want to make it sound like he is what he once was, because he's not. He's pretty much a shell of what he used to be, but he's still a good basketball player. Back in the day, he was a borderline all-star, the way that he was able to play. Now he is a role player, a rotation guy on a good team. I think that's a fair way to depict him. He also has an expiring contract for around $20 million. This could be, I think Chris Harrington of the Daily Memphian wrote about it with Bruce Brown, conveniently enough, someone else that Memphis. We'll see if Bruce Brown plays against the Memphis Grizzlies. It could be an escape hatch or something like that with the Marcus Smart deal, because there's another year on the Marcus Smart contract. So with Lonzo Ball's deal expiring, this would allow for Memphis to add a bigger guard who could be a rotation player. If he doesn't work out, no harm, no foul. And it gets you an opportunity to get off of the Smart deal a year early. I am intrigued by that idea. Obviously, it'd be great to have a Kevin Durant. If he was bought in, it'd be cool to have a Jimmy Butler, as long as Brandon Clark didn't have to leave to get it done. But Jimmy Butler doesn't want to be here. These kinds of deals are the ones that are intriguing to me. If Cam Johnson is not going to be in the plans for whatever reason, having somebody like Lonzo Ball or a Bruce Brown that will allow for the Grizzlies to get potentially not exactly the same production, but comparable production to Marcus Smart, while getting off of that contract a year early and freeing up some cap flexibility for the summer ahead, that feels like a pretty solid plan B or plan C going into the trade deadline on Thursday.
Joe, I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan of this.
Not a Lonzo Ball guy.
No. Let's.
I'm
very much a Lonzo Ball guy.
Okay.
I respect this game, so I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think is Lonzo's best skill set at this point?
I think Lonzo's best skill set at this point is probably secondary facilitation.
Secondary facilitation. I think this Grizzlies team needs perimeter defenders more than secondary facilitators. They got your guy Luke Kennard. They got Desmond Bane. Vince Williams is a very underrated secondary facilitator. He was really good in that role last season, and in the 3 games he played this season, he was good in that role. If you take Marcus Smart out of the equation, what are you just going to depend on? Jalen Wells and Vince Williams to guard LeBron James and Luka if you go against the Lakers. You got Kyrie. We don't know how the Suns situation is going to work out, but, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, if they're still there, but you got those guys. You got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams. The point being, you need more than a couple point of attack defenders, because what happens if Jalen Wells runs into Luka again and gets in foul trouble? And earlier this season when that happened, you know what the Grizzlies did? They put in Marcus Smart. You trade Marcus Smart, you go into Vince Williams, and you better hope this is the same Vince Williams we saw last season.
Does that therefore make you concerned? And I'm sorry to cut you off. Going back to Cam Johnson, because again, that's a name that Memphis keeps floating around. When you think Cam Johnson, you think I've compared him to a better Santi Aldama. It's not a perfect comp, but I think that Cam Johnson's a better scorer than Santi. Santi may be a little bit better off the dribble, but the gap is bigger in terms of scoring the ball, shooting it. Cam Johnson's pretty good. Cam Johnson's also not known as an elite defender. So obviously the deal would be bigger, right? There would have to be draft pick capital put into it. Does that same logic make you hesitant to invest in somebody like Cam Johnson even?
I wouldn't say as much with him because the 3-point shooting is so plus, and then the defense for him is what I like to say serviceable. Like Lonzo Ball's defense is serviceable too. Like before the injuries, he was a really, really good, like potential all defensive type guy. But the point that I was making is what you will get from Lonzo doesn't move me enough in terms of the Grizzlies don't have that. Whereas a guy like Cam Johnson is a knockdown shooter. He can play the 3, he can play the 4. He's knocked down big shots in the playoffs, in the NBA Finals, and in every round of the playoffs. He's shown that his game can translate to the postseason. I mean, that's a big conversation, all the way back to the DeAnthony Melton days and the Luke Kennard days now. Like we always talk about, what can these guys do in the postseason? Cam Johnson's been there and done that. So it's a little bit different. Look, like I said, I'm a fan of Lonzo Ball. And here's the other thing. I didn't even get to touch on this point because we're talking about the Marcus Smart contract. I talked about the on-the-court stuff that he brings. From the financial standpoint, Joe, I might convince you with this part because this is right up your alley. Marcus Smart has over a $20 million cap hit. Unless you have no other option, I don't want to move that contract like it's some negative asset. I want to package that contract into something. That's the Grizzlies. That's the contract that they have right now, where if, I don't know, XYZ superstar becomes available and says, I'm unhappy in XYZ, I want to be traded, the Grizzlies can say, man, we got this Marcus Smart contract and we can attach some pieces to it. And that's a starting point. They don't have another contract like that because the other contracts that are over 20 million cap hits are Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, John Morant. They ain't going nowhere. Well, let me, the Lucas thing has us kind of, but they aren't expected to go anywhere. Whereas with Marcus Smart, the expectation is a little bit different. So what I will say is, I'm more on the lines of, unless it's for a real guy who's going to have that star power or a contract or a big contract like that. And if you have a big contract like that, you're probably a really good player. I'm just chilling into the offseason because you can still move it, and then it'll be expiring in the offseason, and it'd be easier to move it. I just think there are other ways to go about it. Like, I think that's a very strong asset that they have, and just shedding it off as some salary filler is not what I want to see them do with the Marcus Smart contract. Like he's just, some terrible player. Like he can still play.
Especially given all the games that he's missed, he's almost certainly not as valuable via trade as he once was. Teams probably think that they can get a bargain on Smart.
Exactly.
Since I'm going to be flying solo on tomorrow's show going into the trade deadline, I just want to get your take on this.
Mm-hmm.
Would you, given all the things you just said, I'll say
Yeah.
two names. We already got your take on Lonzo Ball. The
Yep.
Grizzlies are about to see Bruce Brown.
Bruce.
Would you want to hold on to Smart instead of Brown as well? And does the 2 picks, Marcus Smart, Santi Aldama / Jake LaRavia / John Contra, whatever it might look like with Brooklyn, do you hold on to Smart in both of those circumstances?
I think that the Cam Johnson, I part ways with him because Cam Johnson has a nice contract over the next couple years or so. And again, the 3-point shooting that you're going to get from him is so plus. It's proven to track in the playoffs. And I'm a believer in Jalen Wells, but Jalen Wells is a rookie. You got to be realistic. Jalen Wells will have some games where, boom, 15 points, 5 made threes. They didn't have a game like he had the other night where he had 2 points, 1 rebound. And there are other players. Same thing with Vince Williams. Like, they're just younger guys that you need a bigger sample size to say, oh, yeah, I trust them in a series against OKC. Whereas with Cam Johnson, we saw him put up buckets against the Bucks in the finals, the Clippers in the Western Conference Finals, and even with the Nets in the playoffs as well. So we've seen him kind of track in that regard in terms of his production can translate to the playoffs. So that's where I am on that. And then the other player you said was
Bruce Brown.
I'm a little iffy on that one because
similar to Lonzo Ball.
Yeah, like it's the same thing. Like he move the needle enough in terms of what the Grizzlies currently have. Basically, in simpler form, I feel like you got to be much better than Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams, and Jalen Wells for me to want to go get another wing. And Bruce Brown, you might say he is better, but I don't think you would say, oh, yeah, he's heads and shoulders better than those guys. I think you would say Cam Johnson is heads and shoulders above those guys. And that's why, going back to the Dorian Finney-Smith thing, that's why I was there. Like, Dorian Finney-Smith is a good, solid role player who has been solid his entire career, but I never looked at him as like, man, he's 10 times better than what you have in Vince Williams or Jalen Wells. So I'm just big on the needle movers. I don't want the whole, oh, this guy is going to improve the team on the margins. It's not enough for me. You need someone that you can say, okay, the Grizzlies just got 3 wins better if they get that guy.
I think you just sold me on it. I don't think that this is the time to play with, oh, well, let's be smart about the salary cap.
Yeah.
4 months from now, right? They're under the luxury tax. They're not going to be, that's the most important part. The apron is not a fear. The second apron, the dreaded second apron is nowhere near a concern. They don't have to have that worry. It's not worth it to disrupt chemistry. And it's nice to have Marcus Smart in your back pocket as that extra defender. Let Damichael and I know how you're feeling going into the trade deadline on this trade deadline eve. I think Damichael and I are on the same page. Cam Johnson, yes. Lonzo Ball, Bruce Brown, not so much. Speaking of Bruce Brown, Memphis is going to potentially, maybe not, see him tonight in Toronto as the Grizzlies take on the Raptors. We're going to preview that game next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about red flags that we should avoid. But what if we focus more on identifying positive signs in relationships, those green flags? If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether it's dating, being married, building a friendship, or just working on your own relationship with you, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy empowers you to set clear expectations and express your needs in relationships. It also provides tools for managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, Grizzlies are in Toronto to take on the Raptors. The Raptors played last night. It was not the best game for them at home. A drumming at the hands of the Knicks. The Knicks were are a
Knicks
very
been
impressive
putting it
team
on teams lately, man. I mean,
Memphis
the Grizzlies took
that
it hard. You
firsthand.
remember that?
I do remember that.
Then,
I talked about that on the last show. The how far we've come, how down everybody felt after that loss. And look at the Grizzlies now, one of the hottest teams, if not the hottest team in the NBA
so
going into the trade deadline. It is funny.
They won 9 out of 10, and that was the one, and the world was crashing in that one.
That was a pretty bad loss, though, in fairness to the fans. But
it was.
Toronto is led by Scotty Barnes, really talented young player, but it's kind of Scotty Barnes and friends right now, right? Jacob Poeltl, Emmanuel Quickley. There's not as much productivity there with RJ Barrett out, especially.
Yeah,
it's not as bad. Right, but this is not the same. And I know Pete Pranica and Brevin Knight talked about this at the end of the San Antonio Spurs game. This is not the same Raptors team that was a couple of months ago. Toronto has been on a bit of a winning streak, themselves. They've been playing much better basketball of late. Memphis will be favored. Memphis has the rest day. Toronto's second night of a back-to-back. It is a home and home for them, in fairness. So they're sleeping in their own bed and all that sort of stuff. But, still after playing the Knicks, it's going to be a tough back-to-back for them. Second night of a back-to-back against Memphis, especially if all these Grizzlies players, it's like Avengers Endgame, right? With everybody's assembling for this one game before the trade deadline. How do you foresee this game playing out for the Grizzlies, who have been really strong this season against Eastern Conference competition in particular?
Yeah, for sure they have. But this will be an interesting game because of the fact that you mentioned how the Raptors have played better as of late, and it comes down to a simple thing, and it's health. If you go back to the beginning of the season for them, I mean, Emmanuel Quickley was this point guard they kind of invested in, and you remember they did the trade with the Knicks. Him and RJ Barrett were supposed to kind of be two players that they felt like they could, put with Scotty Barnes and push that team in the right direction. And Emmanuel Quickley he's been injured 3 times. It's like he got hurt the first time and he was out for a while, and then he comes back. First 2 games, he was hurt again, and then he got hurt recently. So Emmanuel Quickley is going to have potentially a couple games on his belt. You mentioned that's the second leg of a back-to-back, so he hasn't played much this season. Will be interesting to see, if they let him go on the second leg. Same thing, Scotty Barnes. He had the eye injury that took him out for a lot of time earlier this season. Then he had another injury as well. I think it was an ankle injury. So same thing with Scotty Barnes. He's been able to play a lot more as of late, and he's the engine, right? I like to think about the fact that when Darko Rajakovic was here, the current Raptors coach, when he was in Memphis as an assistant, he really liked those type of archetypes that Scotty Barnes has, and really those big guards, forwards that you can turn into those playmaking roles. And Desmond Bane is the one guy who obviously comes to mind, with Darko really kind of investing in helping Desmond Bane become one of the better secondary facilitators in the league. And I think that's a fair assessment of the play that Desmond Bane has given you, especially in those games where Ja's out and he's out there turning out 14 assist games and whatnot. So look, this is a team you cannot overlook. I'm always interested in the big matchups. You mentioned Jakob Poeltl, him going against Zach Edey. Zach Edey is on a 2-game double-double streak. And he has 7 double-doubles this season. It's funny how his February has started completely different than his January. January, first 10 games, Zach Edey couldn't get 10 boards, couldn't get 10 rebounds. It was just it was a struggle. 2 games in February so far, double-doubles, not cheapies either, Joe. We ain't talking 10 points, 10 rebounds, 11 points, 10 rebounds, 14 points, 11 rebounds, 16 points, 14 rebounds. In both games, at least 5 offensive boards. I want to see Zach Edey, as he returns to Canada, to continue to be that forceful presence.
Shout out Canada. I do think Zach Edey is going to come with a little bit of extra energy up there in the Great White North. You can never underestimate a team like Toronto that has played better. You can never underestimate how hard Dick plays. Grady Dick is a really impressive player. Pause. He really does some good work, that Dick, when it gets going. I think that the biggest thing about this game for Memphis is to come out of it healthy, because 2 days after, they have a chance to get a rematch with the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? And the last time these two teams played wasn't as good of an experience for the Memphis Grizzlies. It was something that was hyped up at the time, showdown game. Memphis loses by 24. Players were out. John Conchar led Memphis in rebounding in that game. Yep. That tells you all you need to know about how poorly it went for the Grizzlies. A chance to post-trade deadline, obviously Desmond Bane will likely not be there, but with Ja and Jaren out there, you would imagine you want to put your best foot forward and be a little more competitive against the Oklahoma City Thunder. So you don't want to look past Toronto by any stretch of the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is one of those contests where you look at it as, let's put them away early, right? Second out of a back-to-back. This team doesn't really have much to play for. Let's put them away early and let's get on the plane and let's wait out the trade deadline back home in Memphis.
There's always that mental part of it too. You mentioned the mental part of looking ahead potentially against a team like OKC. What about the other mental part though? With the trade deadline hovering over your shoulder and so many guys on the Grizzlies.
All these guys have the X app, right? They all have access to media accounts.
And it's not even that, Joe. It's not even just that, excuse me. But that Dorian Finney-Smith thing, like when I say there was real legs to that, like a couple of the players knew, like they knew that they were very close to being traded. So as the trade deadline, gets closer, it's that, like, oh, we'll see where we're going to be next week, type of feel. But, some of these guys like Luke Kennard, we talked to him about it, and Luke Kennard's a pro. He's been through this a few times. He knows how this week goes and whatnot. John Conchar went through it last season, right?
Right.
There were all types of rumors about John Conchar.
Xavier Tillman, him and X.
Yep. Both of them were heavily involved in a lot of stuff. X ended up getting traded. Conchar still here. So that is part of it as well. But at the same time, I think this team, at least from what we've seen, they got enough level heads around them to go in there, go into Toronto, continue to get the job done. You got a nice, healthy lead on Houston for the 2 seed right now. This schedule is going to get tougher after this game Wednesday. It gets all the way up to the All-Star break. It's really tough after that. So take care of business against probably the one quote-unquote easy matchup that you still have left before the deadline.
Stack wins. That should be the goal for the Grizzlies whenever they get a chance to. Thankfully, the Eastern Conference is a group that they tend to play particularly well against. So looking forward to tonight's game. I mentioned earlier I'll be flying solo on the Thursday edition of the show, so you can hang out with me and we can talk about all things Grizzlies trade related going into the deadline. Plus, if there is some sort of major move, some shakeup, Damichael and or myself will be available as quickly as we can to get an episode, a quick emergency show, like when Luke Kennard was traded for a couple of years ago. That was one of our best performing episodes.
I remember.
Was the Luke Kennard trade reaction post. So we'll definitely do our best on trade deadline day. Obviously, Damichael works with the commercial appeals, so he'll have work to do there. I have an actual day job, but we will do our best to be with you here over the next 24 or so hours heading in to the NBA trade deadline. That's what our focus will be on our Thursday edition of the show. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast. Make us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Also, make sure that you're subscribing to our free daily newsletter. Go to LockedOnDaily.com, check out the Locked On Grizzlies tab, and get Grizzlies words from me, NBA analysis, fantasy basketball advice, and so much more in your inbox each and every day. Again, free daily newsletter. Go to LockedOnDaily.com. For Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Enjoy this last game of the Grizzlies as they are. Possible nothing happens at the trade deadline. Possible something happens. That injury report as the day goes on is going to be fascinating to keep an eye on. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. We'll catch you back here next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. We appreciate each and every one of you. Have a good day.